Ray White's chief economist has backed a warning from the National Australia Bank that rents may rise by 30% for investors who may try to regain the same rental yield after losing the ability to negatively gear a newly purchased property. It comes as rents soar in the Treasurer's own electorate at 3 times the rate predicted in the budget of just $2 per week. Let's bring in Housing Minister Clare O'Neill and Shadow Attorney General Michaelia Cash. Morning to you, Clare. So we know the $2 increase in the budget forecast was only from your tax reforms. That doesn't account for other factors such as vacancy or interest rates. But why didn't Treasury account for those factors so you can accurately predict just how much rents will go up by?
Well, Nat, I think as your viewers would know, there is an awful lot that goes into determining rents in Australia. And the thing that Treasury modelled in the context of the budget, what is the isolated effect of what the government actually changed about the housing market. And if I just step back for a second, we've got a broken housing system in our country, and it's the renters of Australia who are bearing the brunt of really 40 years of governments not doing enough about this problem. And that has changed with the election of the Albanese government. We have easily the most ambitious housing agenda that a Commonwealth has had for 70 years. And when we're building that agenda, which is about building more homes, getting renters a better deal and getting more Australians into home ownership, it's actually the renters of this country that we have foremost in our mind. They're living with, in many instances, extreme insecurity in their tenancies. They're living in an environment where rents are going up too fast and too high, and they're living with that awful experience of home ownership actually moving further away from them, even though they're doing all the right things. Yeah. So that's what the changes in the budget are all about, making our housing market fairer for Australians and especially for renters who deserve the proper home ownership opportunities that previous generations have got access to. Yeah,
look, I think most people realise this is a long-term problem. It's been coming for years, not just your government. But let's look at the fix. We've got NAB yesterday, which we talked to the Treasurer about, but we've also got Ray White. So they manage, big real estate company, they manage 250,000 rental properties around Australia. They say that because you can't negatively gear, if you're a new investor, you're going to have to recoup your costs somehow, and you're going to hike the rents. So if you buy a property now, obviously not a new property, but if you buy an existing property, you're going to have to hike the rents up, and rents are going to soar 30%. Is that what you're hearing? Because that's enormous.
Yeah, and that's absolutely not what the Treasury analysis showed us, Nat. And if I can just explain to your viewers why. We know that the impact of the budget is not going to be significant on rents, and we know that because of the way...
OK, let's take the budget out of it, because the budget's only going to increase it by $2, which you said. What about other factors, which we're living in? We're living in interest rates going up, possibly. We're living in the cost of living crisis. Yeah. Let's take it all, because this is people's lives.
Yeah,
how much are rents going to go up?
Completely, Nat. And again, renting in our country right now is not the experience that it should be. I completely acknowledge that. And renters are dealing with, the brunt of 40 years of Australian governments not doing enough. That is why we're approaching this problem from every possible angle. Now, your viewers at home, I know, are well versed on the tax changes to make our housing market fairer that the government put in place. That is just part of this massive agenda that we have. It's about building more homes, because the fundamental problem facing renters is actually that we don't have enough rental supply.
Yeah, so rent's going to go up 30%.
Don't forget, Nat, we've also increased Commonwealth rent assistance by almost 50% since we've been in office. That goes to 1 million renting households. We've lifted rental standards for every single renter around the country, and we're getting more Australians into home ownership. But I see we've got a lot more work to do here, and we're really committed to that.
OK. Michaelia, are you thinking that rents are going to go up 30%? Do you believe these reports?
I think that Clare, sadly, needs to start taking a bit of responsibility for her housing policy. But also, Clare, stop gaslighting Australians. Stop gaslighting the mum and dads who are currently watching this show and feeling the impact of your toxic housing taxes. But more than that, stop gaslighting renters. Now, you see, this is the problem now with Labor. It does not matter what Clare says. She can sit on your show and defend her policies, but the evidence on the ground, the evidence from the experts is that Labor's toxic housing taxes are smashing the market. This is Jim Chalmers' own electorate. Clare, explain that to the people who rent this home. This is the impact of your policy. It is not theoretical. As Nat has said, you are dealing with people's lives. 29% increase, 27% increase, 25% increase. Clare, how much more evidence does your government need that your toxic housing taxes are not just smashing the housing market, are not just forcing new home buyers into negative equity, but they are now directly forcing up rent?
Okay,
but there is a
Michaelia.
solution, Nat.
Yes.
Nat, there is a solution.
Okay.
The Labor Party today will capitulate and vote with us to repeal their widow's tax. Clare, we will actually support
I don't know whether that was you. I think that was David Pocock that identified
taxes.
that, Michaelia, and you're sort of like jumping on the bandwagon. But let's go back to Clare. Have you got a response
Not at all.
to Michaelia?
Yeah, I do, Nat, and I just say really respectfully for Michaelia, the idea that the Liberal Party of Australia suddenly care about renters is an absolute ridiculous fantasy, and every Australian can see that. I mean, Michaelia was a part of a government for 9 years that didn't do a damn thing about the housing issues facing the country.
Can we just get a
didn't
response
raise
from Clare?
Commonwealth rent assistance once, didn't do anything about rental standards. For most of the time Michaelia was in office, their government didn't even have a housing minister. Now, we take a different view about it. We believe that the federal government's got to be involved here, and that's why we're ambitious. But, Nat, if I can just say to you, It's so frustrating for your viewers. You've got Michaelia saying one thing, me saying another. I'd ask your viewers to listen to rental advocates, people like Better Renters, like the Australian Council of Social Services, like National Shelter. They are fiercely supportive of what our government has done around these tax changes because they see that we need to fix a broken housing market, and our government is taking important steps towards that.
Okay, just before we go, Clare, do you believe these reports that have now come from two organisations that rents are going to go up 30%?
Nat, really respectfully to you, that's not what the National Australia Bank said. In fact,
What about Ray White?
they issued a clarification yesterday saying that that was not a rental prediction and that the National Australia Bank does not predict rents. So could I just ask we just have a really calm and fact-based conversation here? There are renters at the other end who are in a financially precarious situation.
Well,
and I'd ask
Ray
them
White?
to listen to the facts and to listen to rental advocates who only have their interests at heart.
But what about Ray White? Basically, there are almost as many new investor loans coming from the banks as there were last year. In the June quarter, there's about the same, just about a bit more. We haven't got a breakdown of how many are taking loans out for new builds or existing builds. So basically, we've got all these people still taking out loans as investors. So they've got to recoup their money somehow, don't they? And if they can't negatively gear, they're not going to get their yield. So, Clare, the question is, are they going to have to hike their rents to recoup their money?
Yeah, and again, Nat, I just take you back to the Treasury analysis, which shows that because of the way we have undertaken this change, the impact on rents will be very small.
Okay.
And when I say that, what I'm talking about is the fact that every single person in our country who owned a property on budget night can still get access to negative gearing.
Yes, but we're talking about new.
If you build a new home for the country, you can
Correct.
get access to negative gearing ongoing.
Yes.
That is why the government did the changes in these ways to make sure that we can protect renters.
And we understand that. Of the 52,000 new investor home loans that are coming through in the June quarter, have you got a breakdown of how many were taking the loan out for new builds and how many were for existing?
Yep. So, Nat, we just had some numbers come out of the Australian Bureau of Statistics last week, which showed us that what we are seeing is investor home loans are growing in new builds and declining in the competition for existing homes. And that is the policy that we have put in place to try to give first home buyers an equal playing field. So these are ABS numbers that came out last week that showed us that we're seeing a really promising lift in investment in new builds and declining interest from investors in existing properties. That's so we can make sure that when we've got first home buyers bidding against investors for the first time, we've tilted the scales back in favour of first home buyers. That is a good thing for the country because we've got home ownership rates in this nation falling through the floor. And in my view, if the federal government's not doing anything about that, they shouldn't be the government. We've got to step up and take a big change here because we can't have a housing system that doesn't allow young people to have a stake in our country's future.
And the polls show that nearly 70% want a more attractive first home ownership market. Thank you very much. We'll get those stats. We'll get the breakdown. Thank you very much. See you next week. Here's Sherbo.